What we have done for ourselves alone dies with us. What we have done for others and the world remains and is immortal. Albert Pike. As human beings, we often blindly idolize the concept of sacrifice, the ability to give up all one values, all one is, or all one has ever been in a single moment for the sake of someone or something one deems greater than themselves, is a trait that through the passage of time has been consistently met with praise and admiration. But when one blindly selects sacrifice as their consistent solution, with no attempt to explore other avenues, becoming increasingly unaware of the validity of what is being forfeited, they gradually lose sight of what it truly means to make sacrifice in the first place. When one thinks of the Yu-Gi-Oh franchise, the first things that appear in their mind are usually Yu-Gi-Moto, Seto Kaiba, the Dark Magician, the Blue Eyes White Dragon. But further into the brand lies what I believe to be both the best installment in the franchise, and also a genuinely great piece of storytelling, rivaling many of its contemporaries in the broader shonen genre. Set in the distant future, Yu-Gi-Oh! 5D's builds upon the already existing Duel Monsters card game, evolving into a new type of entertainment known as writing duels. Taking place in Neo-Domino City, a metropolis torn in two years prior by a devastating nuclear incident known as Zero Reverse. In this story, we follow 5 warriors chosen by fate known as Signers, in their crusade against the evils that face them and the world they call home. The protagonist of this story, Yusei Fudo, is a character that is often defined completely differently depending on who one talks to. Some deem him cool and untouchable, while some believe him to be both stagnant and overpowered. Though personally, I think both sides couldn't be further from the truth, because in my view, Yusei is an extraordinarily flawed human being, and although he wins a lot in battle, he is someone who has faced unimaginable loss and sadness in his existence, cementing him into one of my favorite characters ever.
ルドガお前の運命なんて知ったことじゃない。お前は忘れている。お前が運命と呼ぶ狂気のせいで狂わされた多くの人生があることを、残された人間がどれほど辛い目に遭ってきたかを。親父の研究がなければ17年前の事故は起きずに済んだ。あの事故がジャックやクローの両親の命を奪った。みんなの人生をめちゃくちゃにしたんだ。あれさえなければみんな温かい両親がいて幸せな日々を送れたはずなんだ。なのにどうしてあいつらは俺を仲間と認めてくれる。何も言わずに俺に笑いかけてくれる。俺はどうしたらいい。あいつらにどうやって償えばいいんだ。
ユウセイ、
答えろ。答えてみろルドガ。
それがお前の心の闇か。
Yusei is a survivor, and that is unequivocally the single aspect of his that best defines the entirety of his core. Being a survivor of the Zero Reverse incident, and by extension the son of one of its catalysts, Yusei bears unimaginable guilt, and that trait is one of his defining characteristics. Similar to a protagonist like Shiro from the Fate Stay Night series, Yusei is a person spurred forward by this fundamental fact, being willing to sacrifice himself for another's sake with almost zero hesitation, almost as if it was as straightforward as breathing. Due to both the simple desire to protect those around him, and although he never downright states it, the sincere belief that he does not deserve to exist as consequence of the events caused by his father, only valuing the impact he leaves on others, and almost never his own well-being. Said characteristic is where he and his strongest companion Jack Atlas differ completely, dualizing in almost every aspect. Whereas Yusei is a man defined by his past, Jack is a man completely defined by his future. To understand Yusei, one must understand Jack. And to understand Jack, one needs to understand what the concept of power means and represents to Jack as a human being. While power is such a generically used term, and oftenly serves as a simple synonym for strong, power to Jack is what burden is to Yusei: sacrifice. This crucial attribute of sacrifice is the driving force of every core conflict within 5D's as a narrative. This concept of sacrifice and the different definitions that are borne by these many people who oppose the circumstances thrust upon them is what determines the core of almost all major characters within the story, and Jack and Yusei are some of its best examples. During one of our first glimpses into Jack and Yusei's past, we learn that Jack is offered an opportunity to escape Satellite and enter Neo-Domino City by Rex Godwin, in exchange for both his Red Dragon Archfiend card and Yusei's Stardust Dragon. After being offered this opportunity, Jack takes one of his and Yusei's best friends, Raleigh, hostage, then proceeds to give Yusei the ultimatum to decide between saving his Stardust or his friend. Due to who Yusei is as a person, he chooses Raleigh without a second to spare, allowing Jack to steal his prize card and grasp the future that he so desired. It is in this moment that the groundwork is set, and both Yusei and Jack's character arcs are fully established, transforming both Red Dragon Archfiend and Stardust Dragon into the canvases that epitomize both of these two men to a T, having their effects depict their stages of character development and states of mind at core beats within the narrative.
俺はあの時キングへの道を歩むため世界の底から這い出るために全てを捨てた故郷友この技に導かれそれが今何も捨てていない貴様が同じ道を歩もうとしている俺にはそれが許せん許せ貴様にだけは負けるわけにはいかない
To give up all one is surrounded by. To throw away all that cannot keep up with your level of power. This is what sacrifices to Jack. And this crucial ideology is what forms his initial hatred for Yusei. As he himself says, from his point of view he cannot see nor comprehend what Yusei has given up whatsoever. In his mind, Yusei neither understands sacrifice nor has performed it himself. And the fact that Yusei now chases after him, in the position he has forged for himself, without having given up a fraction of what he has had to give up, is what solidifies his conviction and what pushes him forward to utterly annihilate Yusei. Red Dragon Archfiend is a level 8 dragon-type synchro monster bearing 3000 attack points, with an effect that reads, after damage calculation, if this card attacks a defense position monster your opponent controls, destroy all defense position monsters your opponent controls. During your end phase, destroy all other monsters you control that did not declare an attack this turn. This card must be face up on the field to activate and to resolve this effect. These effects completely epitomize Jack with zero room for debate. Its ability to destroy all monsters it deems weaker than itself in defense position completely exhibits the actions Jack takes as a king to ascertain his title, and even more showing, and debatably even more important, is its second effect, to destroy all monsters you control that did not declare an attack that turn. This effect, more than any other, represents what Jack is in his entirety, embodying the decisions he made to leave behind his entire life in Satellite, to pursue his convictions to seize the future he deemed worthy for himself. The decision to abandon his home, to abandon Yusei, and all the others, for a simple fact that they could not keep up with his level of power. In a similar vein, Stardust Dragon represents Yusei as an individual, just as well as Red Dragon Archfiend does for Jack. Clustering wishes will become a new shining star. Become the path its light shines upon. Synchro Summon. Take flight, Stardust Dragon. Just as Jack is a man driven by conviction to gain a future for himself, Yusei is a person who is driven by the desire to bring a future to others. Become the path its light shines upon. A phrase that ends the summoning chants of every single one of his synchro monsters. Although it is something that has been heard so much that it's probably lost all meaning, it is a phrase that sums up Yusei perfectly. Much like Yusei himself, it embodies the ideal of becoming a light that's main purpose is to guide a path for others, and none emanate that paradigm better than his ace monster, Stardust Dragon. Stardust Dragon is also a level 8 dragon-type synchro monster, that this time bears 2500 attack points, with an effect that states, when a card or effect is activated that will destroy a card or cards on the field, quick effect, you contribute this card, negate the activation, and if you do, destroy it. During the end phase, if this effect was activated this turn and was not negated, you can special summon this card from your graveyard. Just like Jack's Red Dragon Archfiend, Stardust embodies Yusei's entire being. A monster willing to sacrifice itself for the protection of others, to become the star that envelops destruction. A monster that only through resolution of its effect to protect others is able to find the salvation to return to the field to repeat its same cycle of sacrifice. A cycle that cannot be escaped by its own action, and can only be ceased by the interference of another card, or the tragic fate of having it be dealt with by direct confrontation. Even down to their designs do these monsters represent their users and dualize one another. Red Dragon Archfiend, a prideful dragon that bears powerful fists, exhibiting a red color scheme that ironically enough matches Yusei's red D-wheel, but opposes Jack's silver one. And Stardust Dragon, a thin yet physically endowed dragon that bears wide ripped wings, displaying a silver color scheme that matches Jack's silver D-wheel, but opposes Yusei's red one, perfectly contrasting their users and finding further duality within their opposers. And as Yusei and Jack develop throughout the narrative, these dragons' evolutions continue to reflect their wielders. Yusei, a man once weighed down by his past, achieves the power of clear mind, a state that requires one to entirely block out and forget their past shackles, uniting their mind with the flowing wind and speed that lays before them, which allows them to obtain Shooting Star Dragon, a level 10 dragon-type synchro monster with 3,300 attack points, whose effect reads, this card can be synchro summoned during your opponent's turn. Once per turn, you can reveal the top 5 cards of your deck, shuffle them back in, and this card's maximum number of attacks on monsters this turn is equal to the number of tuna monsters revealed. Negate the activation of any spell cards, trap cards, or affect monsters' effects that target and destroy a card or cards you control other than this card, and destroy that card. Once per opponent's turn, you can remove this card from play to activate this effect. If you do, you can negate 1 attack this turn from a monster your opponent controls. During the end phase, if this effect was activated this turn and was not negated, return this card that was removed this way to the field. Shooting Star possesses a multitude of abilities that reflect Yusei's growth throughout the narrative. The effect to excavate the tuna monsters on the top of its player's deck in order to gain further attacks, reflect his gradual separation from his past that once plagued him, and new reliance on the future that lays in front of him. The effect to banish itself, to protect not just others, but now also itself from both battle and card effect, shows his evolving sense of self-acceptance and value of himself, and builds upon Stardust Dragon's destruction prevention by no longer needing to sacrifice itself to activate that part of its ability. And Jack, a man once fixated only on his future, achieves the power of Burning Soul, an ability only possible due to his connection to the ancient past, and the legendary Signer who once fought alongside the Crimson Dragon, which enables him to obtain Red Nova Dragon, a level 12 dragon-type synchro monster with 3,500 attack, whose effect reads, this card gains 500 attack for each tuna monster in your graveyard. This card cannot be destroyed by the effects of your opponent's spells, traps, or monsters. Once per opponent's turn, you can remove this card from play. If you do, you can negate 1 attack this turn from a monster your opponent controls. During the end phase, return this card that was removed by this effect to the field. Red Nova, just like Shooting Star does for Yusei, bears an arsenal of effects that reflect Jack's growth within the series. The ability to gain attack for the tuna monsters that have already been sent to the graveyard earlier in the duel. Now instead of destroying monsters that cannot keep up with its power, is only able to gain true strength by relying on those of the past, showing that Jack too has evolved to no longer equate the definition of power to require the sacrifice and isolation from all that once stood beside him. Also sharing the effect that Shooting Star possesses, to banish itself to protect both itself and others from battle and card effect, but still make sure to bear a striking duality to Shooting Star, only having the continuous ability to protect itself from card effects, unlike Yusei's dragon, whose effect protects only others facing a fate of destruction. As was always intended, these two dragons' characterizations are a perfect extension of their owners, serving as a large chunk of the explanation for the duality and dynamic these two men share. Although they are both driven by strikingly opposing mindsets, Jack and Yusei are both people who find similarity in circumstance to one another very quickly as the story progresses. Throughout the narrative, they both often fight for the same side, against the same adversary, and are driven by the same overarching goal, but duality always stays key between them. Despite the fact they both experience a very similar set of emotions, the events that trigger them, regardless of being under one consistent banner, always bring out very different emotional ranges from them, even if they both come from very similar passionate places. While they both fight against Darksiders out of a sense of duty to their specific opponents, Yusei fights Kiryu out of a clear sense of forced accountability, whereas Jack fights Kali far more out of a sense of self-imposed responsibility. With Aki, Jack is the one who saves her life and body from the aftermath of her duel with Misty, while Yusei is the one who comes to save her heart and mind from the pain that emerges. When against Godwin, while they both wish to defeat him for the similar motivation of preventing needless destruction, Jack fights abrasively and with pure aggression, attempting to end Godwin as swiftly as possible. But Yusei fights with a primarily pure desire of attempting to change Godwin's heart with multiple strikes in a far more drawn-out attempt to avoid both Godwin's destruction and the world's. While fighting Team Taiyo, they're both driven by a feeling of appreciation and respect for their opponent's sheer dedication. Where Jack is driven far more by a sense of worry and anxiety for their opponent's achievements in summoning Zushin the Sleeping Giant, Yusei is driven by a pure sense of elation and joy in response to their achievements, declaring himself as nothing more than a mere challenger facing against a mighty opponent that returns him to his roots. When against Team Ragnarok, while again their overarching motivation is to advance forward in the WRGP, Jack's driving desire here is to prove himself completely on his own merit, trying to prove how far he's come from his past at Dragon, attempting to make a final breakaway from the chains of his past ignorance to Godwin's actions, whereas Yusei is driven by the desire to prove to Harold the steps he's made at breaking away from his chains of past guilt due to his father's previous actions, and his conviction to protect the city from its impending fate due to his own drive, rather than it being a responsibility forced onto him by fate's revolving cog, even if he has to turn to miracles in the moment to advance the impact of his prerogative.
見事だ、雄星。この世に不要なものなどない。絆を合わせ強者を倒す渾身の一撃。俺の魂に響いたぞ、雄星。どうやらここに戻る理由ができたな。
いつでも戻ってこいよ。俺は待ってる。
ふん。次は負けんぞ。
また全力を尽くそう。
The list of examples of these two men approaching similar situations from identical greater motivations that diverge at very key emotional points goes on and on. From their beginning to their end, these small dualities are key driving factors for their personal character arcs, and it is only through the existence of these dualities and the respect they both develop for each other that they are able to solidify their decisions to walk down the futures they choose for themselves, realizing that without the other taking notice and giving them their sense of respect and some form of approval, that they could never walk down a path of any greater conviction, due to what the other represents and embodies to them. The legendary tale of Icarus, the story of the one who flew too close to the sun and lost his wings to the sun's mighty blaze. While this story is often not one of the first things that comes to mind when one thinks of Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds, on closer inspection, it is an undeniable reference that lays consistent with its core and is exemplified better by none than Rex Godwin. At first glance, Rex and Yusei couldn't appear more different if they tried. The director and leader of a metropolis, and an orphan from the slums? Not two people you'd expect to share similar life trajectories. But the paths these two men walk down are some of the closest linked in the series. The bonds Yusei shares with the people he loves are an obvious defining factor of his being. And although bond is not a word many often equate to Rex Godwin, it is just as much a defining trait of his as it is for Yusei. Although the number of bonds Rex shares is nowhere near the number that Yusei possesses, the strength of the ones he does share with the ones he loves, and the willingness to give up everything he has for those bonds, is undeniably just as strong. Rex's strongest bond is the one he shares with his brother. Rudger is a person who was always destined for great things. Ever since he was young, he was heralded as a prodigy and genius by all who surrounded him. And although Rex always stood behind his brother in this regard, he never bore feelings of resentment or hatred against him, only showcasing extraordinary dedication and respect towards his brother, always wanting to stand alongside him at every venture he walked down. Sadly though, the most grueling path Rudger had to walk down was one Rex was unable to walk alongside him. Bearing both the mark of the dragon head and the spider is a fate that's turmoil cannot be understated, and this fate is one that was thrust upon Rudger and one he struggled with immensely. Although he could have simply given immediately in to the spider's dark will, Rudger chose to fight against its influence, attempting to centralize the war between both light and darkness to within his own flesh and blood. This battle within his body left an unimaginable physical and mental toll on Rudger, almost completely destroying him inside out. Despite this, until Iliasta's interference, he stayed true to his ideal and did everything within his power to fight against the battlefield within him. While in the end he succumbed to the spider's influence, the strength of his determination stayed true, and in a final last-ditch effort, before performing the incident that would change the world's course forever, he entrusted his arm of the dragon to his brother Rex, thrusting onto him the weight of the fate he once had to tackle alone. This newfound burden leaves incredible weight on Rex, becoming the driving motivation of almost every waking decision he makes till the day of his death. Just like Yusei, despite the Zero Reverse incident not being his own doing, Rex bears similar burden and guilt towards its occurrence, believing that if he was simply slightly more capable, he could have understood his brother's turmoil and prevented the incident that caused the split in the city he loved so dearly. Just like his brother, Rex made a last-ditch effort to stay true to his former ideal, creating the Tideless Bridge and becoming the legendary hero of Satellite, a man whose influence would never be forgotten and would become the ideal that many people within Satellite would attempt to reach. Sadly, although his motivations in creating the bridge were nothing but pure, he was discovered by the same city he fought for and was marked a criminal, beginning a relentless chase that, similar to the tale of Icarus, ended in Rex flying too close to the sun, crashing directly back to Earth, robbing him of his arm in the process, solidifying his conviction to pursue the path of necessary solitude, and bear the mission entrusted to him by his brother of uniting the Signers to fight against him.
あの事故で俺とジャック、ユーセイの両親は死に、シティはサテライトと2つに分断された。伝説の男でさえ、シティとサテライトの分裂を止めることはできなかった。
君はダイダロスブリッジから飛んだ男を知っているのか？
いや、だがそいつの夢を忘れたことはない。俺はいつかシティとサテライトを一つにしてみせる。
君もユーセイと志を同じにするものというわけか。ユーセイに伝えなさい。もし兄を倒したなら私が待っているとな。
待て！それはどういう意味だ、ゴドウィン！
A person inspired by the legend he forged was Crow Hogan, a boy from Satellite who grew up alongside Yusei Fudo. While many were inspired by this legend, Crow is a person who formed his entire life around it, even attaining the Blackwing deck, a deck of avian monsters which take clear influence from the legend of Icarus that Godwin embodied to these people. None in Crow's deck better embody this inspiration of Icarus than his Blackwing Armor Master. Blackwing Armor Master is a level 7 winged beast synchro monster that has 2,500 attack points, whose effect reads, this card cannot be destroyed by battle, and you take no battle damage from battles involving this card. If this card attacks a monster, you can place one wedge counter on that monster at the end of the damage step, maximum 1. You can remove all wedge counters from your opponent's monsters to reduce the attack and defense of each monster that had a wedge counter to 0 until the end phase. Armor Master is a monster that very clearly takes influence from Icarus, attacking into monsters greater than it, the sun, but bears one great striking difference to Icarus, being the fact that it survives its encounter with the sun and lives to tell the tale. This embodies Crow absolutely, a person who takes influence from his heroes, but due to the simple facts of life is unable to intimately know the truth that lies behind them. Just as he doesn't know of Godwin's fate, of crashing back to Earth after his leap to the sun, Armor Master's effect does not reflect that part of the legendary story, only reflecting the parts that Crow intimately understands and idolizes. As time continues to pass, Rex deviates more and more from the legend he once embodied, further walking down the path of his newfound conviction, completely cursing himself to total isolation and solitude. The further he walks down this path, the more he realizes the bitter reality that humans alone cannot change the trajectory of fate, convincing himself that the only road forward is to become a literal god in an attempt to have one final piece of influence over the mighty tides that rule our existence. After assembling the Signers, he fights his brother Rudger in a climactic battle which ends in his purposely attained loss. It is in this battle that the final pieces come together and he begins to enact his final plan. To become light and darkness, to become the beginning and the end, the Alpha and the Omega. To surpass both the brightness of the sun that burnt his wings and the darkness of the moon that he was forced to become intimate with upon his crash to Earth. To attain complete and utter solitude. to become God itself. This is what Rex convinces himself is the only way forward. Rex becomes a Dark Signer, bearing the mark of the Condor, the beast most akin to the Icarus of his past, and also chooses to bear the mark of the Dragon, the beast that controlled the trajectory of his future. It is after this that he challenges Jack, Crow, and most importantly, the one who he finds the most similarity in, the one that lived a life controlled by undeserved guilt and burden, that too was forced to walk down the path of sacrifice, Yusei Fudo, to a final duel to decide the fate of all mankind. In this duel, Rex showcases an arsenal of new monsters representing his newfound ideologies, including Sun Dragon Inti, a 3000 attack dragon synchro monster whose effect reads, once per turn, you can reduce the attack of this card to 0 until the end phase. This effect can be activated during either player's turn. When this card is destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard, destroy the monster that destroyed this card and inflict damage to your opponent equal to that monster's attack. And Moondragon Queer, a level -6 2500 attack dragon-type dark synchro monster, whose effect is, when Sun Dragon Inti you control is destroyed and sent to the graveyard, special summon this card from your graveyard. When this card you control is destroyed and sent to the graveyard, special summon one Sun Dragon Inti from your graveyard. During your end phase, destroy this card. These two monsters, while obviously representing his newfound powers of both light and darkness, also represent his relationship with both of these concepts throughout his life. Inti, the sun that he challenged in an attempt to outrun destiny, and Queer, the moon, the darkness he walked into after his encounter with the sun, as well as the bond he shares with his brother, being a pair of monsters that represent both light and dark, that upon destruction of each other link back to one another in an inescapable cycle. Although he convinces himself that by combining light and darkness they are now one, no matter how much they may try to embody solitude, they will always be two monsters that share a strong bond and are intrinsically linked just like he is with his brother, standing as individuals who are connected by fate and the bond they share. Against these two, Jack and Crow take actions driven by pure aggression, in an attempt to thwart Godwin's plan, whereas Yusei takes a different approach, summoning the level 7 warrior synchro monster Junk Archer, whose effect states, once per turn you can select one monster your opponent controls, remove that monster from play. During the end phase of this turn, it returns to your opponent's side of the field in the same position. Just like many of Yusei's monsters, Junk Archer is yet another one who represents him extraordinarily well, having the ability to banish monsters until the end phase without destroying them, permanently reflecting Yusei's want to strike Godwin and attempt to change him directly, but most importantly, his complete faith and respect in Rex and Rudger's bond, and the way these two dragons represent said bond, by not breaking the cycle between Inti and Queer, allowing them to return to the field once Yusei's attempts to strike Rex directly have failed. On the opposite end of the spectrum is Earthbound Immortal Wira Kocharaska, a level 10 winged beast monster whose effect reads, while this card is face-up on the field, Earthbound Immortal monsters cannot be summoned. If there is no face-up field spell card on the field, the following effects are negated, and this card is destroyed during the end phase. This card can attack your opponent directly. This card cannot be attacked by your opponent's monsters, but does not prevent your opponent from attacking you directly. This card is unaffected by the effects of your opponent's spell and trap cards. Once per turn, by skipping the battle phase, you can make your opponent's life points become 1. Raska is without a doubt the culmination of Rex's entire character, completely epitomizing everything that makes up his entire identity. Being a condor, a mighty avian beast, shows his obvious connection to the Icarus he once embodied. It only bearing one attack point, with the attack name Death Singularity, showcases his commitment to solitude, and the effect to rob his other monster's ability to attack, to simply bring others down to his same level of solitude by reducing their life points to 1, with its Polar Star Obey effect, whose name stands as a complete antithesis to Yusei, where Yusei is a person who views himself as a star to guide and form a path for others, obviously bearing Stardust Dragon. Godwin becomes the star that attempts to oppress others and force them to obey.
ジャック・アトラズ、貴様言ったな。どれほどのものを捨てようと人は孤独になれないと。だがそれは違う。人は簡単に孤独になれる。それは死だ。人は死を前にしたとき、自分には仲間など絆などなかったのだと気づかされる。当たり前のことだ。死へ旅立つのは己一人なのだからな。
ゴドウィン、
もう一度かつてのジャック・アトラス に戻してあげよう。死を目前にした絶望的な孤独へ。
Although in the end, Godwin does end up losing to Yusei. Against his own premonition of what death truly entails, he is given the privilege to walk down death's road with the most important person in his universe by his side, cementing himself to Yusei as no more than a good man led astray. Although the paths they walk down differ, Yusei is being forged by companionship, and Rex is being formed by solitude. Rex is someone whose impact never leaves Yusei for the rest of his waking days, becoming someone that he respects and admires deeply. So much so, in fact, when Yusei is met with the fate of reaching Arc Cradle, he does not try to prove that he is now capable of achieving what Rex once failed, but instead simply asks him to watch over and guide him on his journey to gain the wings Rex yearned for so long ago. To stand alone at the end of the world, to take on the burden of the world, to take on the duty of saving the world. Just as Yusei can be defined by the word survivor, Zone can probably be even more so defined by it. From the distant future, Zone is a man who lived a life of unimaginable sacrifice, a man who met the final day of the world and took on its weight alone. In the distant future, humanity evolved to an extraordinary point. Alongside this evolution of man came the evolution of momentum, the system developed by Yusei's father, which gained power through the representation of the world's bond, synchro summoning. On this path of human expansion, humankind became increasingly more reliant on the bond they shared with their fellow man, driving them to the point of sheer ignorance, convincing themselves that no matter how much wrong an individual performed, they could simply turn a blind eye to their own sins and rely on the rest of the human race to do good in their place, resulting in the second Zero Reverse. Similar to its first incarnation, this second occurrence of Zero Reverse brought unfathomable mayhem and destruction to the world, spreading this time far beyond the scope of Neo Domino City, resulting in the genocide of all mankind. In this time, Zone lived as a regular man, watching the atrocities that took place in front of him with almost complete powerlessness. This is until he remembered the legendary hero from the past, Yusei Fudo. Being guided by his example, Zone sacrificed his entire humanity to take on the guise of this legendary symbol of hope, becoming what he deemed to be a new incarnation of the original hero himself. At first, this abandoning of himself brought success for his desires, bringing temporary solace and safety to the lost people of his day. Though sadly, the actions of a man attempting to masquerade as another can only have impact for so long. After time, the effect Zone left on the people by becoming Yusei Fudo gradually wore off, and after not too long, the original sins that brought mankind to its darkest days returned, ending the final annihilation of the last remaining people who surrounded Zone, leaving him and only 3 others as the final remaining survivors of mankind.
Minna! 結局私は誰一人救うことができなかった。人の心を変えることなど不可能だった。
Alongside Zone, the ones he called his final companions, Aporia, Antinomy, and Paradox, also chose the path of abandoning what made them human. In their minds, the presence of their humanity was what they convinced themselves was their greatest anchor to their prior despair, and by separating themselves from this humanity, they would have a final chance to challenge the cogs of fate. This, though, was what stood as their greatest hypocrisies. In their attempt to challenge the humanity they claimed to now despise, they completely displayed the greatest depths of the human condition. Paradox, one who had lost all he found solace in and the world he once admired, used as a menagerie of cards possessed by legendary duelists throughout the entirety of time, showing that despite his want to destroy humanity, he was entirely aware that he was only able to do so by relying on the cards and achievements of some of the greatest saviors of the humanity he claimed he was now above. Aporia, a man who lost everything that surrounded him, the parents he treasured, the woman he loved, and the world he called home. In his final crusade against the remnants of the humanity he convinced himself he had separated himself from, was completely reminded of the purest and most human definitions of both hope and despair, ending up fighting against his original cause in their name. Antinomy, one who had lost his entire career, and the world he found presence in, gave the foundation of evolution to Yusei, providing him with the necessary tools to grasp the future he could not possess himself, to the point where he sacrificed his entire life for Yusei's sake, becoming the first person in life who had ever made sacrifice for the man who spent his entire life making sacrifice for everyone that surrounded him. And Zone, a man who stood as the final survivor of humanity, and claimed to now be the one who found the destruction of many of its members a necessity, made steps that almost completely jeopardized the entirety of his plan by making unnecessary decisions that resulted in the benefit of a group of humans, Team 5D's, enabling them to evolve to a point where they could oppose him, for which he most likely secretly hoped. Also bearing the Time Lord monsters, a group of cards ironically based on the 10 attributes or emanations of the Tree of Life, a force usually representing encompassing aspects of existence, God, or the human psyche, some of the greatest fundamentals to the human condition. To guide and connect people's hearts. These are the final words left to Yusei by his father. And although they are words he only heard so late into his life, they were words that defined him long before then. Yusei Fudo is a person who finds his own definition of himself through the impact he leaves on others. He is a person who believes his primary mission in life is to become the path that shines a way for others, to sacrifice himself in order to guide them down a lightened road. Zone is a person who once stood totally in line with this ideology, but grew to stand as its complete antithesis. Where Yusei's purest desire is to guide others along their own paths, Zone is a man who is driven by a crushing desperation to change people's hearts, leading them down the only path he believes is left standing. Far more than any decision he makes for himself, or any action he would personally take, Yusei is one who fervently believes that he is defined by the actions that others take in response to the guidance he gives them. Zone embodies this aspect of Yusei completely, being a man entirely separate from Yusei, who walked into his darkest days due to nothing more than the sheer effect that Yusei's guidance and example managed to leave to the people living far beyond his time. Coming to terms with this fact was undeniably the most polarizing moment of Yusei's life, forcing him to come face to face with a complete physical embodiment of every flaw and fault within his mindset, bringing him to silently question every single ideology he'd ever shaped himself around. This in the end is what ultimately pushes him to finally take steps away from the destructive mentality of believing that the future of others requires the necessity of his sacrifice at every step and turn. In their final confrontation, Zone and Yusei both reach their highest peaks. Yusei, mastering all 6 Signer Dragons, showcases the strength of the connections he shares with his greatest comrades, resulting in the creation of over-top Clear Mind and Limit over Excel Synchro, giving birth to Shooting Quasar Dragon, a level 12 dragon synchro monster with 4,000 attack, whose effect reads, this card can attack as many times as the number of synchro monsters used as material. When this card attacks, you can negate the activation and effect of one card on the field that negates until the end of the battle phase. In addition, negate any effect damage. This card is unaffected by the monster effects of your opponent's monsters. When this card is removed from the field, destroy all monsters on the field, and special summon one Shooting Star Dragon from your extra deck with its effects negated. This special summon is treated as a synchro summon. As is expected, Shooting Quasar Dragon is the final culmination of Yusei's entire evolution and character arc. At face value, it is obviously the largest and strongest of Yusei's synchro monsters. It has an effect to attack multiple times based on its synchro materials, obviously showing the bond he shares with his comrades, and also possesses the perfect effect to defeat the Time Lords that plagued him, because that's how final boss monsters work. But on closer inspection, bears even more elements that show the extent of his growth as a human being. It being the first of his dragon synchro monsters to not bear any necessity of sacrifice to negate opposing effects, demonstrates the development he has attained in regards to his newfound realization of his own importance in life, dualizing against Cosmic Blazer Dragon, the apex of his evolution in the timeline without Zone's interference, and its effect which still requires the necessity of its sacrifice to activate, and the effect that upon leaving the field, summons Shooting Star Dragon, now with its effects negated, exhibiting the fact that no matter what, the strongest bonds Yusei shares with the ones he loves will always in the end tie back to him, but now will prevent him from resorting back to the self-sacrifice he once used to define his existence. As opposed to Yusei's new monster that represents the connections he shares with those around him, Zone bears the source of nothingness and existence, Cephalon the Ultimate Time Lord, a level 10 fairy monster with 4,000 attack, whose effect reads, cannot be special summoned except by infinite light. Once per turn you can special summon as many Time Lord monsters as possible from your hand, deck, and or graveyard, and their attack becomes 4,000. This card gains attack equal to the combined attack of all Time Lord monsters you control, except Cephalon the Ultimate Time Lord. Negate the effects of any monster that battles with this card. If this face-up card would be destroyed, you can remove from play one of the face-up Time Lord monster you control instead, and if this card would be destroyed by battle, you take no battle damage from that battle. Just like Quasar, Cephalon represents its user perfectly. It no longer bearing the protection that the original Time Lords possess, exhibits Zone's final desperation, abandoning safeguards and careful planning to rely completely on this final proof of his grief to win the battle he had given up everything to pursue so long ago, hastily and aggressively, and its effect to summon as many Time Lords as possible, proceeding to sacrifice them to gain the protection they ordinarily possess, showcases his last attempts to discard his remaining emotions and connections to the humanity he once considered himself to be a part of, in order to gain a final sense of protection. In the end, the climactic showdown between Yusei and Zone is decided by a single attack. A single attack that represents the culmination of the entirety of the human race. Stardust Dragon attacking Cephalon the Ultimate Time Lord with one final shooting Sonic.
Zone! 大丈夫かゾーン
ユース、
しっかりしろ
無駄です。私の生命維持装置が今止まろうとしている。
ゾーン
いいのです。私の命はもう限界でした。本当は私も君たちが変える未来を見届けたかった。だが私にはその時間がなかった。
もう喋るな。
ユーセ、私はずっと孤独だった。けれど死んでいった仲間との絆を思い出し、自らを奮い立たせてきた。しかしもう疲れました。ユーセ、私のやってきたことは間違いだったのでしょうか。
お前は自分の未来を切り開こうとしてきただけだ。お前の与えてくれた警告は今に生きる人々の胸に深く刻まれた。俺たちがそれを忘れない限りきっと未来は変えられる。
ユーセ、私は人生の最後に新たな未来を切り開くあなたを見た。あなたならきっとやれる。あなたなら人々を導くことができる。
だが俺にはまだやることが残っている。
死ぬつもりなのですね。
アーククレイドルを浮上させるにはマイナス回転をしているモーメントにプラス回転をしているモーメントをぶつける必要がある。それが俺の最後の役目だ。
Even after all this, Yusei, after the battle concludes, remembers the final words entrusted to him by Antinomy and rushes to Zone's side to assure his safety. Understanding now completely that despite everything he had done, what drove this now broken man was nothing more than a pure desire to save the world he loved for the sake of the ones he loved. After witnessing this, despite understanding himself more than ever, despite understanding his importance more than ever, Yusei attempts to make one final sacrifice. However, this time, not one out of necessity, not one out of believing that there is no other option or road to go down. One made completely with understanding of what is being forfeited. Though, at the last second, Zone interferes, giving Yusei the final gift of life, a life to be eternally treasured, sacrificing himself in his place, allowing Zone to finally be reunited with the men who once stood alongside him as brothers. After Zone's sacrifice, things return to a sense of normalcy in Yusei's life, though the lingering thoughts of what Zone forewarned the world would turn to become vital and life-changing parts of Yusei's expanded world. It is after this that Yusei chooses the path that his father inspired him to take, to become the one that guides and connects people, to become a constant pillar for those who need his guidance, choosing a road that no longer requires the necessity of his sacrifice to achieve, becoming like his father, a scientist, developing the fortune system, a system that assimilates the lifeline of Neo Domino City by linking it with other cities, with Neo Domino, just like Yusei, becoming a central pillar. In life, all we can do is walk down a path we believe to be most correct, to do the best we humanly can. In our lives, we will face all kinds of challenges. We will experience all types of highs and lows. We will find times that require sacrifice. We will come across situations that require us to give up the things that truly matter to us. But in our life, it is important to never forget the fundamentals that form what makes us human. Our lives will forever have value, while we stand with our 2 feet on the ground and long after. It is detrimental to never lose understanding of what we mean to the world around us and what our loss will leave behind in the world. Though most importantly, the bonds we share are the primary thing that matters in life, in our best days and our worst. The people we surround ourselves with, the people we can say that we love and treasure, are the truly greatest thing to keep close. With them by our side, ahead of us is the future we create, the riding duel known as life.
Riding duel! Acceleration!